here he is now going off to volunteer and thinking back to Schopenhauer and his studies, and he's slowly putting these pieces together, his philosophical creation. And here he tells us, this is in the letter, he saw these troops and this was his reaction. His bad eyesight disqualifies him from frontline soldier, so he never is actually in frontline battlefields. And then even when he volunteers for nursing, he's a little too delicate because the sight of blood made him ill. So that's not a very good nurse. As any of you in the room who are nurses already know, that's a big disqualifier when you go into the nursing program and they say, do you have any problems with it? And you say, well, I can't stand the sight of blood, but other than that, I'm okay. But we should just remember that quote for his book, The Will to Power, because, of course, in the 20th century, that's the most important book. And he's telling us right here in his own experience what it is all about. Now, we can also connect this back to Rousseau. That is, we're at this point 100 years into Romanticism. We're 100 years down the road from 1750 when Rousseau begins to outline some of the key ideas of Romanticism. But one of the key things in Romanticism was a kind of new appreciation of violence. That is, appreciation of war and of all the different things that is part of it, because Romanticism wanted to shake off the oppressive rationalism that they had experienced in the Enlightenment, and so action is one of the ways of doing that. So Nietzsche in 1850, 100 years later, isn't that far away from both Rousseau and Byron. If you know Byron's work, you know that he's writing himself about war that is revolution. Now, Byron goes off to a war, to the Greek Revolution, and leads it, raises money for it, takes the ships over with all their stuff that was being taken to the Greek Revolution, and then leads the revolution from the front and dies. So another hero of romantic action in war is Byron, the great Byronic figure. So here we have the romantic philosopher as well as the careful, thoughtful scientist. So Franco-Prussian War, 1870-71, there's the French giving up, and there's the leader of France sitting there with his little cap on, and the King of Prussia on the right, Frederick William on the right, and the French are giving up, as you know. Then it's followed by the siege of Paris and the peace treaty. There is the king of the new German Empire signing the peace treaty at Versailles. They chose Versailles just to rub it into those French. Those mean Germans took their troops and all went and took Versailles, and then made the French peace delegation come to Versailles and sign the peace delegation in Versailles, just saying so much for Louis XIV. Goodbye to all that. So war's over, and he returns to the University of Basel, and he will have had 10 years in Basel, but by 1879, his migraines and his illnesses are incapacitating him again and again and again, and so by 1879, he resigns. Now, he gets a pension, so the amount of time he's put in was enough for him to qualify, so he can take that money. And so among the different places that he goes, one of the places that he chooses in Switzerland near St. Moritz because of the excellent high altitude clear air. Now, this was very, very common prescription by doctors in the 19th century. Oh, you need to go to the high air of Switzerland where your breathing will be easier and you'll all get better. In fact, it became one of the most famous great novels at the beginning of the 20th century, The Magic Mountain. And that's the essence of Thomas Mann's spectacular novel, one of the greatest novels of the 20th century, The Magic Mountain. And the whole premise of it was all these people having to come away from the different places where they came from and go up to the heights of the Magic Mountain and get a cure. And the book is all about those people. So here he is. He'll be staying in various hotels and rented apartments and such for all the rest of the years now of his life until his collapse in about 1890. So he roughly has 10 years on the road from his resignation in 1879 to 1890. Here's one of the houses that he rented in Sills, and the rest of and that's still there. So they've kept it as a little Nietzsche house. The lake was one of the attractions, Lake Sills, and then that's what it looks like in the winter. So very, very beautiful. And so for the next 10 years, he's basically on the road because of his health and because of the recommendation of different medical authorities said, well, you want hot climate, so okay, that meant Italy. So there were some places you could go in Italy, or the high, clear air of Switzerland, and so there were various places. So that's how he's going to live. Here's the next stop. Now you're all wondering how he could afford all this. Well, he really couldn't. He really didn't have resources for all this traveling. So various people during his life will help. And so his family will send money. His mother will send money. His various friends contribute at different times. He does publish things, and some of those things garner some income. But still, it's a tough life. It's on the road, and it's without friends. The most important part of it is because he's on the road so much and changing his location, most of it for health reasons. He doesn't really have a community around him. He doesn't have a continuous town. He has no family with him, and he doesn't have consistent friends either. But amazingly enough, this next 10 years is going to be the most productive of his whole life. He's just writing and publishing all the time and staying in rented rooms and staying in small hotels, often sort of seedy ones, without very much in the activity of a social life, except for this. So now, in 1882, Nietzsche finds love, real love. Well, I shouldn't say real love because it's lacking a few things, but at least there is an existing object of his love. There's actually a real human being, and a very, very amazing human being, and her name was Lou Andreas Salome, and she was Russian. Now you say, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like a very Russian name. Well, her family had been French Huguenots. And in the crackdown in the 17th century, when Louis XIV exiled all the Protestants out of his country, Russia invited them to come there if they wanted it. French Huguenots wanted to come to Russia. They got all kinds of benefits and houses and everything. It was a very smart action on the part of the Russian government. And so a whole lot of French Huguenots just picked up and went to Russia. And so then those very advanced, energetic, hardworking people settled into St. Petersburg largely. Lou Andreas Salome was from this very prosperous, very successful Russian, French, Huguenot Protestant family in St. Petersburg. And you can see she's younger than Nietzsche by 19 years. So when he meets her, she's a young girl. He's like in his 30s, so still, acceptable as a boyfriend. They met because her mother had brought her to Rome for a study session, so she was in Rome studying various fields and with her mother. And so a mutual friend of theirs brought Nietzsche to a meeting, and all three of them met and talked at this meeting. It was some lecture. And of course, Nietzsche found Lou to be just spectacularly attractive and interesting, young. So she's like 20, I guess, or maybe not even 20 yet, 19. And so he just went head over heels in love with her. Now, he doesn't tell her that yet. That's going to come later. Who was the mutual friend? Well, the mutual friend was Paul Rée. He was an independently wealthy northern German Jew from a very prosperous family, such that he could travel around the world and go to talks and go to lectures and write books and pretend that he was a philosopher. Now, he wasn't a great philosopher, and if you look him up, the most significant thing in his whole life was he was a friend of Friedrich Nietzsche. So the one thing that he did was make a friend of Nietzsche, and that put him in the Wikipedia. So fortunately for him, we remember him thanks to his friend Nietzsche. So the three of them now met in Rome, and both men were crazy about Lou, both men. And they were both thinking the same thing: I can't wait till I get my hands on this woman. And they had to ditch the mother first. And so now there developed conversations among the three of them. Lou was a very smart, canny, clever, brilliant, very charming, way more sophisticated than her years. And she right away knew she could have these two interesting guys fawning over her and never have to go to bed with either one of them. So she could play them off against each other. So right away she came up with this idea of, well, why don't the three of us set up a little commune someplace? Why don't we find a deserted monastery and we'll rent it, and then we'll just have a wonderful seminar, a 7-day-a-week seminar, and we'll talk about philosophy, and we'll talk about creation, we'll talk about order, and she'd read all the books. So both men thought this was a great idea because it meant they were going to get to spend a lot of time with her, and they both knew, of course, if they got enough time, they would get her. And she knew neither one of them was going to get her, but she liked immensely the idea that she'd have these two brilliant guys. This began now the most exciting period of Nietzsche's personal life. There's nothing else like this ever to happen to him again, because he has a wild, passionate love for Lou. She was worthy of it. She was a fascinating, brilliant, widely read person of a very young age, and attractive, very attractive. And so begins the love affair that wasn't a love affair, because, of course, it's all in Nietzsche's head. Nietzsche's madly in love with her, and for the next year, he's going to be imagining that she'll give in at a point and accept his proposal of marriage, which she is not going to do. She has no intention of marrying him. She doesn't want to be his boyfriend. She wants to have him and Paul Ray talk philosophy with her all the time. And so that's what they do from now on, is that the three of them talk philosophy all the time. Now the strategy for each of them, and here's a little picture of the map of Italy so that you can see, it was all unfolding in various Italian locations and Swiss locations. So they would go to one place and they would say, oh, no, let's go here. Oh, maybe we'll, and then they were looking for this monastery, but they really weren't, of course. They were just kind of, talking about it. And the main strategy for Nietzsche was to get Lou to take long walks. That was the key. Long walks. And there's all kinds of letters from everybody involved here about the long walks, because, of course, Nietzsche was dreaming he'd get her on the long walk enough so that finally at the end of the long walk she'd say, oh yes, I'm really mad in love with you, and we'll get rid of Paul Ray. And so he would take her on 10-hour long walks. I know, you wonder, what do you talk about for 10 hours? I mean, 1, yes, or 2 maybe, but 10, that's a lot of philosophy. But that was his idea. The longer the walk, the further they got from Paul Ray, and the more chance that she would finally tell him what he knew she was going to tell him. She knew eventually she was going to tell him, well, I really love you, not him. And you were right all along to stick with me because I really do love you. I just haven't told you that so far. The ménage à trois continued all over Europe. I don't know where everybody got enough money for all the trips they took, but she had money and Paul Ray had money, so somebody was financing Nietzsche. I'll show you one picture of the ménage because it's the best picture of the whole night. So let me put this up. Look at this. Does that sum up the whole thing? Does that sum up the story we're telling here tonight? There she is, and she's got her 2 philosophical ponies hitched to the cart, and she has the whip. She has the whip. Could that be better?